The morning sun filtered through the wide glass windows of the penthouse office, painting streaks of gold across the polished oak desk. But Daniel Hayes barely noticed. His laptop was open. His phone buzzed with endless notifications, and a stack of files stood like a wall between him and the rest of the world. He was 38, a successful CEO who had built a multi-million-dollar tech company from scratch, but success came with a heavy price. Across town, his 8-year-old daughter Emily sat at home, her school bag tossed aside, her small fingers pressing random notes on their old upright piano. The sound echoed through the empty house, a melody of loneliness. Since her mother passed away 3 years ago, Emily had found comfort in music. But what she truly wanted was someone to guide her, someone who could help her play the songs her mother used to sing. Daniel knew this. He loved his daughter fiercely, but his life had become a balancing act between running a company and being a present father. He had promised himself that Emily would never feel neglected, yet every late night and missed school event made that promise harder to keep. Hiring a private music teacher felt like the best he could do for now, and not just any teacher. Daniel had gone through a list of recommendations and chosen the most qualified, a woman with years of classical training, a master's degree and an impressive RA.Sum.A. The kind of professional who could shape Emily's talent into something extraordinary. He had arranged everything through an agency, paid in advance, and circled the date on his calendar. This was the day. At precisely 4 o'clock the doorbell rang. Daniel, still wearing his crisp navy suit from work, opened the door with relief. He expected someone polished, professional, maybe even intimidating. Instead, standing on the doorstep was a woman who seemed different. She was young, maybe early 30s, with gentle eyes and hair tied loosely in a bun. Her clothes weren't the sleek attire of a conservatory-trained musician. They were simple, practical, the kind of outfit worn by someone always on the move. She carried a battered leather satchel and held herself with a mixture of nervousness and quiet determination. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "Yes," Daniel replied cautiously, his hand tightening on the doorframe. "I'm Grace Miller," she said, smiling with a touch of warmth that didn't quite hide the nerves in her eyes. "I'm here for Emily's piano lesson." Daniel blinked. "Piano lesson? You're the teacher?" "Yes." She nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I was told you needed someone starting today." Something felt wrong. Daniel pulled out his phone, scanning through the email confirmation he'd received. His brow furrowed. The name matched Miller, but the photograph he remembered on the website, a poised woman in her 50s with sharp features and an elegant black dress, looked nothing like the woman before him. There must have been a mistake. For a moment, Daniel considered ending it right there. He didn't have time for errors, not when it came to his daughter. But behind him, he heard the light patter of footsteps. Emily had come running from the living room, her face lighting up at the sight of someone new. "Daddy, is this my teacher?" she asked eagerly. Grace smiled at her, her expression softening in a way Daniel hadn't seen in years. "You must be Emily," she said, crouching slightly to meet the child's eyes. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Emily beamed, her excitement radiating through the hallway. Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to disappoint his daughter, not after she had spent the whole week asking when her teacher would finally arrive. Still, doubt gnawed at him. "Look," Daniel said in a low voice to Grace, "I think there's been a mix-up. I was expecting someone else." Grace's smile faltered for just a second, and her hands tightened on the strap of her satchel. "Oh, I see. Well, I understand if you'd rather not." Emily's small hand tugged at her father's sleeve. "Please, Daddy. Just one lesson, please." Her big brown eyes shimmered with the kind of pleading only a child could manage. Daniel sighed, caught between logic and love. He was a man used to making tough decisions in the boardroom. But this was different. He saw the hope in his daughter's face, and he couldn't bring himself to crush it. "Fine," he said finally, his voice reluctant. "Just one lesson. But if it doesn't work out..." Emily didn't let him finish. She was already pulling Grace toward the piano in the living room, chattering excitedly about her favorite songs. Grace followed, her earlier nervousness melting into genuine warmth as she settled beside the piano bench. Daniel lingered at the doorway, arms crossed, skepticism still etched across his face. He had no idea what to expect. Grace wasn't the teacher he had carefully selected, she wasn't the safe, proven choice. She was, by all appearances, a mistake. And yet, as Grace placed her hands gently on the piano keys and coaxed Emily to play, the air in the room seemed to shift. The rigid silence of the house softened into something else, something alive. Grace didn't begin with scales or rigid posture. Instead, she asked Emily about her favorite song, humming the melody with her until Emily's small fingers found the notes. The first chord was hesitant, the second, steadier. Then Emily laughed, a clear, bright sound that echoed through the house like sunlight breaking through clouds. Daniel froze. It had been so long since he'd heard that laugh. His chest tightened, and for a fleeting moment, the exhaustion of late nights and board meetings melted away. Maybe, just maybe, this mistake wasn't a mistake at all. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the Hayes living room, casting a warm golden glow across the upright piano. Dust motes danced in the air, visible only when Emily shifted excitedly on the bench, her legs swinging back and forth as if she couldn't keep still. Grace placed her satchel gently on the floor and sat down beside Emily, her posture relaxed and approachable. Unlike the teachers Emily had imagined, stern-faced and demanding scales, Grace leaned slightly forward, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "So, Emily," she began softly, "what kind of music do you love? Not what you think you should play, but the songs that make your heart feel light." Emily blinked, caught off guard by the question. She had expected instructions, maybe a lecture about hand positions or the importance of practice. Instead, Grace wanted to know about her heart. I like the song my mom used to sing," Emily whispered, her fingers hovering above the keys. Daniel, standing in the doorway with his arms folded, felt his chest tighten at the mention of his late wife. He rarely heard Emily speak of her mother so openly. The pain was still there for both of them, raw and unspoken. Grace tilted her head gently. "Would you like to play a little of it for me, even if it's not perfect?" Emily hesitated, then pressed a few uneven notes. The melody stumbled, but Grace didn't correct her. She simply hummed along, matching the tune until Emily's small hands began to relax. Slowly, awkward notes transformed into something closer to music. "That's beautiful," Grace encouraged, her voice like a steady hand on Emily's shoulder. "Music isn't about perfection, it's about telling a story. And I think you have a lot of stories inside you." Emily's face lit up. For the first time in months, she felt understood. From the doorway, Daniel's skepticism began to waver. He had expected technique, rules, structure. Instead, Grace's teaching was playful, intuitive, full of warmth. And strangely, it was working. Emily giggled as Grace tapped the rhythm on the piano lid, making it sound like a gentle drumbeat. "Now try again," Grace said, smiling. "But this time, don't worry about the wrong notes. Just follow the beat, let the song carry you." Emily pressed the keys again, this time with more confidence. The melody was still uneven, but it was alive. Her small face glowed with excitement as she reached the end of the phrase. "You did it." Grace clapped softly, her enthusiasm so genuine that Emily threw her arms around her without thinking. "See, that's the magic. Music is about feeling, not fear." Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't seen Emily this happy since before everything changed. He had spent so long trying to fill her life with the best tutors, the best schools, the best opportunities. But none of that had brought this kind of light to her eyes. Grace caught his gaze briefly, and for the first time, Daniel saw something in her expression. Kindness that wasn't forced, patience that came from a deeper place. It was as if she understood not only Emily's needs, but also his unspoken worries as a father. "Can I show you something?" Grace asked Emily, reaching into her satchel. She pulled out a small notebook, worn at the edges, its pages filled with scribbled music notes and little drawings. "This is my songbook. Whenever I feel something, happy, sad, scared, I write it down here, and sometimes I make it into a song. Do you want to make your own?" Emily's eyes widened. "Really, I can." "Of course," Grace replied. "You don't have to be a professional composer to write music. You just have to be you." Daniel's eyebrows rose. This wasn't the kind of structured training he had expected, yet Emily was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement, nodding furiously. "Okay," Grace said, flipping to a blank page. She drew a simple staff with a pencil and handed it to Emily. "Tell me about your favorite memory with your mom." Emily's voice softened. "She used to sing to me at night, when I couldn't sleep. She said the stars were singing too." Grace smiled gently. "Then let's make a song about stars. You can call it whatever you like." Emily scribbled something on the top of the page in her uneven handwriting, "Mom Stars." As Grace guided her through writing a few simple notes, Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. His daughter wasn't just learning music, she was learning how to hold on to her mother's memory without pain swallowing it whole. For a man who had built his life on precision, on logic, on plans that always had to make sense, this moment was disarming. It was unplanned, it was messy, and yet it was perfect. He leaned against the doorway, his arms uncrossing, his shoulders softening as he listened. Emily's laughter filled the house, mingling with the uneven but joyful piano notes. By the end of the hour, Emily had created a short, clumsy little tune. It wasn't flawless, but when she played it, her smile stretched ear to ear. Grace clapped again, this time louder, and Emily giggled, covering her face with her hands. "You're amazing," Grace told her. "And we're just getting started." Daniel finally stepped into the room, clearing his throat. Grace looked up, perhaps expecting criticism, but instead Daniel surprised himself with the words that came out. "She's never been this excited about music," he admitted quietly. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion he tried so hard to keep buried. "So thank you." Grace's expression softened, her eyes holding his for a moment longer than expected. "She has a gift," she said. "All she needs is someone to believe in her." Emily hopped off the piano bench and hugged her father tightly, her voice bubbling with joy. Daddy, can she come back, please? I want her to be my teacher forever. Daniel hesitated, the CEO in him still wary of hiring someone who wasn't the professional he had intended, but the father in him, the one who had just seen his daughter glow with happiness, knew the answer before his mind could argue. We'll see, he said gently, ruffling Emily's hair. Grace began packing up her notebook, but Daniel caught the faintest smile tugging at her lips. He realized she hadn't just reached his daughter, she had quietly reached him too, and as the evening settled over the house, the faint melody of Emily's Mom's Stars lingered in the air, carrying with it the first notes of something Daniel hadn't felt in years: hope. The weeks passed more quickly than Daniel expected. What had begun as just one lesson turned into a regular rhythm. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons filled with the sound of Emily's laughter and piano keys. Each time Grace arrived, the house seemed to breathe differently, as if the walls themselves welcomed her presence. Daniel, though still cautious, found himself lingering near the living room more often, listening. He would stand by the doorway with his tie loosened, pretending to check emails, when in truth he was listening to his daughter's happiness being rebuilt note by note. But one Thursday, Grace arrived later than usual. Daniel checked his watch, irritation flickering in his chest. Punctuality was second nature to him in business, it was a matter of respect. He opened the door with that stern CEO look he often wore during board meetings, and there she was, Grace, slightly out of breath, her hair messy from the wind, a flushed apology on her lips. But what caught Daniel's attention wasn't her appearance. It was the small boy clinging to her hand. He couldn't have been older than 5. His clothes were clean but worn, his sneakers scuffed. He held a coloring book under one arm and looked up at Daniel with wide, cautious eyes. "I'm so sorry," Grace blurted, her voice tinged with both embarrassment and exhaustion. "My babysitter canceled last minute, and I didn't want to cancel Emily's lesson. I hope it's okay that I brought my son Noah." Daniel blinked, his brows furrowing. He hadn't expected this. His first instinct was to say no. That his home was for Emily, that lessons should remain professional. But then he caught sight of Emily bounding down the stairs, her face lighting up at the sight of Grace. "Grace!" she squealed, rushing to hug her. Then her eyes landed on Noah. "Who's that?" Grace bent down to Noah's level, giving him a reassuring squeeze of the hand. "This is my little boy."
Noah. Emily's natural warmth shone
instantly. "Hi Noah, do you want to see our piano?" Noah glanced nervously at his mother, then nodded shyly. Grace smiled gratefully. "He'll just sit quietly while we do the lesson. I promise he won't be any trouble." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but the scene unfolded before he could protest. Emily had already taken Noah's hand, leading him to the living room as though he belonged there. The boy settled on the rug with his coloring book, flipping to a blank page. Grace sighed softly, setting down her satchel. "Thank you," she said, her voice lower now, directed at Daniel. "I didn't want to disappoint Emily. She's been working so hard." Daniel studied her for a moment. For the first time, he noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the way she carried herself with strength but also with a quiet wariness. It was the kind of fatigue he knew well, the fatigue of someone who bore the weight of responsibility alone. The lesson began and Emily played with her usual eagerness. Grace encouraged her gently, tapping rhythms on the piano lid, weaving little stories into the music. All the while Noah sat quietly nearby, his crayons scratching against paper. He didn't make a sound, but every so often, he glanced up at his mother with a look of admiration. Halfway through the lesson, Emily stumbled on a passage and groaned dramatically. "I'll never get it right," she complained, her small fists clenching. Grace chuckled softly and leaned closer. "Do you know what I tell Noah when he feels like giving up?" Emily shook her head. "I tell him mistakes are just stepping stones. Every wrong note brings you closer to the right one. Want to try again?" Emily nodded, determination flaring again, and pressed the keys with renewed focus. This time she got it. "See," Grace said warmly. "You just needed that stepping stone." Noah clapped from the rug, his little hands making a soft pattering sound. Emily giggled, bowing dramatically. Daniel watched it all unfold, his heart unexpectedly heavy. He had never thought about Grace beyond her role as Emily's teacher. But now, seeing her with Noah, he saw something different. A mother who was doing everything she could to give her child a life filled with love, even when the odds were stacked against her. After the lesson, as Emily bounded upstairs to show her drawing of Mom's Stars to her bedroom wall, Daniel found himself alone with Grace in the kitchen. Noah sat at the table quietly coloring, humming to himself. "You're a single mom," Daniel said, not as a question but as an observation. Grace looked up, startled, then gave a small, rueful smile. "Yes. It's just me and Noah." "How do you manage?" Daniel asked, more curious than he intended. Grace shrugged lightly, but there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Lot of coffee. A lot of praying things work out. I work part-time jobs wherever I can. Teaching, waitressing, sometimes temp work. It's not easy, but he's worth everything." Daniel glanced at Noah, who was now carefully shading in a star with a yellow crayon. He recognized that look, the devotion of a child who saw his parent as his whole world. Something stirred in him. He thought of Emily, of the countless nights he had buried himself in work, trying to be both father and provider. He thought of the moments he had missed, and how hard it had been to raise her without her mother. For the first time, he realized he wasn't the only one carrying that invisible burden. "You're strong," he said quietly, surprising himself with the softness of his tone. Grace blinked, as if she hadn't expected kindness. "I don't always feel that way. But I try. I think when you're a parent, you don't get to quit. You just keep going, no matter what." Her words hit Daniel like a mirror. He saw himself in them, every sleepless night, every tough decision, every sacrifice he'd made for Emily, and suddenly, the distance he had felt from Grace, the line between employer and employee blurred. As she packed her things, Noah tugged gently at her sleeve. "Mummy, can I come again next time?" "Emily's fun." Grace smiled, brushing his hair back. "We'll see, sweetheart." But Emily, who had returned just in time to hear, piped up enthusiastically, "Yes! No! You have to come back! You can play piano with me." Daniel met Grace's eyes. For a moment no words were needed. He saw the gratitude there, the unspoken apology, the silent resilience. And in himself, he felt something he hadn't allowed in years, compassion that stretched beyond his own walls. As they left, Emily waved furiously from the porch, calling after them, "Bye, Grace! Bye, Noah!" Grace smiled, holding her son's hand as they walked down the driveway. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching them go. For the first time, he realized that maybe this wasn't just about Emily's piano lessons. Maybe this was about something bigger. Two parents, both carrying heavy loads, crossing paths by accident but somehow finding pieces of themselves reflected in the other. And though he didn't say it aloud, Daniel knew their stories were no longer separate. The school auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly with parents, siblings, and grandparents, all dressed in their best. A low hum of conversation blended with the occasional squeak of a microphone as teachers scurried about, trying to keep the recital organized. Backstage, however, it was a different story. Emily sat on a narrow bench, her small hands clutching the edge of her dress. Her heart pounded so hard she swore the other kids could hear it. She had practiced her piece for weeks. Grace had even helped her write her own little variation at the end, something special that felt like hers. But now, staring at the heavy red curtains and hearing the muffled applause from the audience, she wanted to disappear. "I can't do it," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel was kneeling beside her, his polished shoes planted firmly on the linoleum floor. For once he wasn't the confident CEO, he was just a dad fumbling for the right words. "You've practiced, sweetheart. You're ready." Emily shook her head fiercely, her eyes filling with tears. "What if I mess up? What if everyone laughs at me?" Daniel's heart squeezed. He wanted to fix it, to promise her nothing bad would happen. But he knew fear wasn't something you could erase with logic. He was still searching for an answer when Grace knelt down on Emily's other side, her calm presence like a steadying anchor. "Hey," she said gently, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. "Do you remember the first time you played your mom's song for me?" Emily nodded slowly, sniffling. "You were scared then too," Grace reminded her. "But you played anyway. And do you remember what happened?" Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You said it was beautiful." Grace's eyes softened. "That's right. Because it was. Not because it was perfect, but because it was yours. Music isn't about impressing people. It's about sharing a piece of your heart. And let me tell you a secret." Emily leaned in, wide-eyed. "Every time I've been afraid to play," Grace whispered, "I imagine the music like a little light inside me. And when I share it, that light grows, and it shines for other people too. You have that light, Emily. And I think your mom would be so proud to see you shine tonight." The tears welled in Daniel's eyes before he could stop them. He looked away quickly, pretending to adjust his tie, but inside he felt something break open. Grace wasn't just teaching his daughter notes on a piano. She was teaching her courage. Emily drew in a shaky breath, her shoulders straightening. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I'll try." Grace squeezed her hand, then glanced at Daniel. Their eyes met for a moment, and he felt an unspoken connection, like she had given him something, too. The reminder that bravery wasn't about being unafraid, but about stepping forward anyway. Moments later, Emily's name was called. She walked out onto the stage, her small figure swallowed by the spotlight. The audience applauded politely, and she bowed just as Grace had taught her. Her hands trembled as she sat at the piano, but when she glanced toward the wings, she saw Grace and her father watching her, both smiling with quiet encouragement. She placed her fingers on the keys. The first note rang out, soft but steady. Then another. The melody began to weave together, shaky at first, then growing stronger with each phrase. By the time she reached the middle, Emily had forgotten the crowd. She was back in her living room, playing her mother's song with Grace beside her, humming along. And then came the ending, the little variation Grace had encouraged her to write. Emily took a deep breath and played it, her own voice shining through the music. It was simple, imperfect, but full of heart. When the final note faded into silence there was a beat of stillness, then the auditorium erupted in applause. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with joy. She stood and gave a shy bow, cheeks flushed with pride. From the wings, Daniel clapped harder than anyone, his chest swelling with emotion. But his eyes weren't only on his daughter, they were on Grace. He saw the pride in her expression, the tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. She had given Emily something priceless tonight, not just the ability to play, but the belief in herself. And Daniel realized, in a way that shook him, that Grace had given him something too. Watching Emily on stage he wasn't just proud, he was grateful. Grateful that fate had brought this woman, this wrong teacher, into their lives. After the recital, parents swarmed the hallway with flowers and congratulations. Emily came running out, her dress bouncing as she launched herself into her father's arms. "Daddy, did you hear? Did you see?" she cried, her voice bubbling over with excitement. "I saw everything," Daniel said, hugging her tightly. "You were incredible." His voice broke on the last word, and he kissed the top of her head, swallowing the lump in his throat. Emily pulled back, her eyes shining. "It's because of Grace, she made me brave." Daniel turned, finding Grace a few feet away, standing with Noah, who was clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers. She looked almost embarrassed, as if she didn't want to take credit. But Noah tugged her sleeve and proudly held up the flowers. "They're for you, Mommy," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Because you're the best teacher in the world." Grace knelt, hugging him tightly, her face buried in his hair for a moment as she blinked back tears. Daniel's heart ached in a way he hadn't expected. Here was a woman who had so little yet gave so much, a woman who had poured her love not only into her own child but into his as well. As the crowd began to thin, Daniel walked over. Emily was still buzzing with excitement, clutching Grace's hand now as though she never wanted to let go. "Thank you," Daniel said simply, his voice low but full of sincerity. Grace shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. Emily did this all on her own." "No," Daniel said firmly, his eyes locking with hers. "She did it because you believed in her. And because you reminded her she wasn't alone." For a moment, they just stood there, their children laughing together nearby, the glow of the recital wrapping around them like a soft blanket. Daniel realized then that the music Grace had brought into their home wasn't just for Emily, it was for all of them. And as they stepped out into the cool night air, Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty: life had given him a gift he never expected. Grace wasn't the teacher he had hired, she was the teacher they needed. The evening air outside the school auditorium was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of pine trees from the nearby park. The glow of the streetlights spilled golden pools across the pavement as families and children streamed out, buzzing with excitement from the recital. Emily had done it. She had sat at that piano in front of hundreds of people, hands trembling at first, then finding her rhythm, her courage, and finishing with a flourish that made the whole audience rise to their feet. Daniel stood just a few steps behind, still feeling the thunder of applause echoing in his chest. But what moved him most wasn't the applause, it was Emily's words before she began. "I want to dedicate this to my two teachers, Miss Grace, who taught me music, and my dad, who taught me never to give up." He had nearly broken down right there, in front of everyone. Now, as Emily skipped ahead with Noah, their laughter ringing through the night like the sweetest duet, Daniel slowed his steps to walk beside Grace. She carried herself with humility, almost as if she didn't realize how deeply she had changed everything. Not just for Emily but for him. "Grace," Daniel began, his voice quieter than he intended. "I don't even know how to thank you." She gave a soft laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't have to. Emily's the one who did all the work. She's extraordinary." Daniel stopped walking for a moment, forcing her to meet his eyes. "No, Grace. This isn't just about music. You've given my daughter something I couldn't. You gave her back her confidence, her smile. You gave her back a piece of her childhood." Grace's eyes shimmered in the streetlight, though she tried to look away. "You don't know how much that means to me to hear. Honestly, when I first came to your house, I thought I'd blown it. I was so sure you'd send me away." Daniel chuckled softly, remembering his own irritation that day. "Believe me, I almost did." Then his tone shifted, becoming more thoughtful. "But sometimes mistakes turn out to be the best decisions we never planned." They continued walking, the children darting ahead, their little footsteps echoing. Grace's son, Noah, turned back and called, "Mom, can we come over to Emily's house again soon?" Emily clasped his hand, answering before Grace could. "Of course you can, Noah." Grace smiled, shaking her head lightly. "See what you've started." Daniel's heart warmed at the sight of their children together. They weren't just playmates. They were kindred spirits, finding in each other the friendship and comfort they both had been missing. He could see Emily glowing in Noah's presence, and Noah seemed just as safe with her. The silence stretched for a beat, filled only with the children's laughter. Then Daniel said the words he'd been turning over in his mind for weeks. Grace, you shouldn't have to struggle the way you do. I've seen you juggling 3 jobs, coming here after long shifts, worrying about babysitters. You've been giving my daughter everything you have, even when you had almost nothing left for yourself. Grace slowed her steps, blinking in surprise. Daniel, I am fine. Really, it's just what I have to do. He shook his head. No, you're more than fine, you're incredible. But you shouldn't have to live in survival mode all the time. You deserve stability, and honestly, the world deserves more of what you have to give. Her brow furrowed slightly, unsure where he was going. What are you saying? Daniel took a deep breath. I run a foundation through my company. We fund community programs, arts education mentorship. We've been searching for someone to lead a new music outreach program for kids who can't afford lessons. Someone who doesn't just teach notes, but teaches hope. Someone like you. Grace stopped walking completely, staring at him as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. You're offering me a job. Not just a job, Daniel said gently. A future. A way to do what you love without having to sacrifice every piece of yourself. You'll have a salary, benefits, stability for Noah, and you'll get to share your gift with dozens of children, not just Emily. Her lips parted, but for a moment no sound came out. Her eyes glistened as she finally whispered, Daniel, why would you do this for me? He looked straight at her, his voice steady but full of emotion. Because you did it for me first. You walked into my house by accident, and instead of turning away you stayed. You gave my daughter back her laughter. You reminded me what really matters: family, kindness, music, hope. You've already changed our lives, Grace. Let me help change yours. Tears spilled freely now down her cheeks, though she smiled through them. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Daniel said simply, his own smile tugging at the corner of his lips. She let out a shaky laugh, nodding as she wiped her tears. Yes, yes, of course. At that moment Emily and Noah came running back to them, their cheeks flushed from play. What's going on? Emily asked, looking between her dad and Grace. Daniel crouched down to his daughter's level. Emily, guess what? Miss Grace is going to be teaching lots of kids now, not just you. She's going to help even more children find the joy you've found. Emily clapped her hands excitedly, then hugged Grace tightly around the waist. That means you'll be around more, right? You're not going anywhere. Grace knelt down and hugged her back, whispering, No, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. The children darted off again, but Daniel and Grace stood side by side watching them. In the distance, the night sky stretched above them, vast, filled with stars, like a blank sheet of music waiting to be written on. Daniel glanced at Grace, and for the first time in years, he felt a quiet peace settle over him. This wasn't just about hiring a teacher or building a program. It was about finding family in unexpected places, about second chances, for him, for Emily, for Grace and Noah. And as Emily's laughter mingled with Noah's in the night air, Daniel realized something profound. Sometimes the wrong doorbell, the wrong name, the wrong appointment leads you exactly where you're meant to be. The wrong teacher had become the right person. The story closes on the image of Grace and Daniel walking side by side, their children ahead of them, laughter filling the air, as if life itself were composing a new symphony, one born not of perfection, but of kindness, resilience, and the music of love.